Hey guys, welcome back. So now, getting back into our talks on 3 Jokers, of which at this point we're getting into book 2. And I gotta say, it's fascinating the approach that Geoff Johns has taken with this series, at least so far, because I'm sure that he knows what we're expecting. But even with those expectations aside, which we'll talk about towards the end of this video, but even with those expectations aside, like at face value, I still truly believe that this is a really good story. So let's jump back in. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so with the way that we jump back in and we get this moment where the comedian Joker, he pulls up to a house, opens the door and says, "Honey, I'm home." And when we actually see who he's talking to, it appears to be his wife, who we had seen in The Killing Joke before he had become the Red Hood, and of course before he had become the Joker. And one of the first things that struck me when I seen this was like, one, she's making octopus again. And I guess I would make the assumption that however many years back, before the Joker had become the Red Hood and they both were younger and his wife was still pregnant, that at the time octopus just must have been his favorite dish, or just that octopus and grits were all they could afford at the time. But with the way that we're given this scene in the beginning, it's kind of set up like the Joker, he had visited his wife and son a number of times for years consistently, even after becoming the Joker. And even at this point we see his son here, to whom, if I had to guess, maybe 10 years old. But with seeing the way that this is set up, it's almost like the Joker, he's causing them to relive the way that they did, or at least the way that him and his wife did prior to becoming the Red Hood and then becoming the Joker. And it's like these repeated visits and this octopus for dinner type thing, like they scare the mess out of his wife and son, with the theme and the repetition being psychotic. But then we quickly come to find out that this was just a daydream when the comedian Joker is approached by the criminal Joker. And at this point it's really tough to say whether he's thinking back on these memories or he's just thinking of how he wishes that it could be. But I do want to say it would be pretty insane if the comedian Joker had spent a number of years not only putting his family in that quote decent home that he always wanted to, but then on top of that finding out like if he had went back and visited Miss Burkus, who was at the time their landlord, like the old lady with the cat, who scoffed at him like every time that he came home. But I do gotta say that it would be crazy if we found out that he had went back there and he told the cat and the old lady like, "Look at me now," and only to find out that the cat likes octopus too. But really, even still, this is just an idea based on the thought that the Joker's wife and child are still alive, which within itself is still a stretch because as far as I'm aware of, we had seen she was killed back in Batman Gotham Knights issue 54, which was in a flashback when the younger Riddler had seen she was murdered. But now there's 3 Jokers, so who knows. But when the criminal Joker arrives here, he reads right into the daydream of the comedian, but he lets him know with coming back here and setting up the whole imaginary family situation that this setup isn't real and that the comedian needs to focus more on Batman. And on top of that, criminal Joker lets him know like it was the comedian's idea to make it a little more fun, add a trail, but the only thing that trail really led to was the death of the clown Joker. But after this, we then go over to Commissioner Gordon, who's with Batman, and they've made their way over to the home of Judge Walls. And when we see them get there, like all the guard dogs have been Jokerized, but Batman gets there first, hits them with tranquilizers so that everybody else can get in. But with them all coming here, they were responding to a Joker sighting, but as it turns out, it was just a Jokerized Judge Walls, who after being Jokerized was then mauled by his own dogs. And although it kind of raises the question of why him, why now, and Gordon mentioning that Walls had retired years ago, but it's here where Batman mentions that Walls was actually forced out when it was discovered that he had been sending criminals to parts of the asylum where security wasn't so tight and allowing criminals to get back out, which effectively made Judge Walls responsible for the criminal revolving door. And with seeing this, like immediately just comes to mind like the whole argument with people saying should Batman kill, shouldn't he? Because that argument, it really just stems from the idea of when Batman locks criminals up, they're gonna get back out and the cycle's gonna repeat. And now I know I've said this before, I can't remember what video, but that problem you cannot entirely pin on Batman, because at the end of the day, if criminals are always escaping from Arkham, you can't then point the finger at the person who keeps bringing them back. But so now right after this, Batgirl walks in. And when I first read this, I was like, oh snap, here we go. Because 1, she's alone, 2, she's not escorting the Joker, and 3, Red Hood isn't there. And first Gordon's like, did the Joker get away? And Barbara's like, nope. And after that, Batman's like, where's Red Hood? And in my mind, like if this had played out in live action, like right there, we would have just flipped to the Batmobile screeching tires around the corner. Like as soon as Batman said, where's Red Hood? Like we look at Barbara one last time and she'd have said something like, Batman, we gotta talk. And after that, the Batmobile just like just taking off. But it's here where Barbara tells Batman what happened with Jason shooting the Joker, and Batman's response is he killed a Joker. Like, relax. Like, there's two more. Plenty to go around. But it's here where we get to understand a little bit better how Batman sees this, because for one, he can't just turn in the Red Hood, because if they do, they would unmask him, and then with Batgirl being the only witness, she would be unmasked right after, which would expose both her and Jason Todd. And as a solution for this, Batman tells her that he's going to talk to Jason. Which for Barbara, for her, it's not enough, and also in her opinion, a little late for that. But in a nutshell, Bruce's point is that in the case of both Jason and Barbara, who are both deeply psychologically scarred by the Joker, but in the case of Barbara, she got stronger, she got better. But in the case of Jason, he's still suffering. And the reason why Bruce had waited all this time to talk to Jason is because he thought he would have eventually come around like Barbara. And also it's like here, when we go over to Jason, who much like in book 1, when we find him here, he's beating down some dudes that work with the Joker, and he's throwing more fists than questions, and for the most part, a majority of these dudes didn't even know why they were getting beat up. But when Jason gets down to the last guy, and he repeats the question that he had asked the first time, one last time, with Jason knowing that these guys were told to find a place to hide all the chemicals. But this last guy, he's terrified to tell the Hood because he believes that the Joker, that he'll deal with him in a much worse way than the Hood could even imagine. But at this point, it doesn't matter if he talks or not, because Jason's already scanned him and picked up a clue to where this location may be. But in the case of Batman and Batgirl, like Barbara, she believes that Bruce is looking for Jason until they start heading out the city, and then she's like, okay Batman, where we going? But instead Bruce tells her that he had found some prints on an award at the home of Judge Walls. But essentially he had found a match to these prints which belonged to an inmate, which led them to Blackgate, because the match for these prints, as it turns out, is Joe Chill. And although it's crazy seeing this thread tie with Joe Chill and his prints showing up on the same night of the murder, but to me, like in my mind, I'm like, okay, finally, another connection to Darkseid War. Could be something, could be nothing, who knows? We'll talk about that later. But with Batman walking to the cell of Joe Chill, and it's dark so he can't see if he's in there, curled up in the corner, but when Bruce gets there, it takes him a minute to turn from that kid who was in Crime Alley back into Batman. But after he pulls himself together, he kicks down the cell door and Joe Chill is not there. And as it turns out, it's because he's been moved to the hospital wing 2 months prior to this night because he's been battling stage 4 cancer. And because of that, as of right now, it just doesn't make sense how he could have been here in this condition, but also at the scene of the murder of Judge Walls on the same night. But then it's here where we jump back over to Jason, who's made his way to the condemned building of the Gotham City Athletic Association. And he had pretty much narrowed down his search to this building from combining the information which he gathered with his Hood in his recent interrogation, and somewhere in between running that information to the Bat computer, which then led him here. And when he gets there, he finds a pool full of bodies that have been tossed in with the chemicals, much like the Joker when he fell into the chemicals beginning his transformation, except for this time it was kind of done in bulk. But when Jason gets here, he tests the water and he realizes that the chemicals resolved, and at least to the point to where it's safe to breathe. But then when he takes his helmet off, one of the bodies just reaches up out of the pool and grabbing for his leg, asking for help. And Jason just kicks him in the face, because I wouldn't have trusted that either. But after this, Jason's then grabbed from behind to where he then wakes up in his birthday suit to the Joker explaining to him how things work in threes. And Criminal Joker gives Jason the rundown of his original rebirths, because originally Jason was a petty thief, but then after that Batman took him in, making him the second Robin, and it was then that Jason was reborn. But then after that, with Jason's literal death, he was reborn again. But because things happen in threes, now it's more or less time for Jason to go through his final rebirth. And with Jason, who's sitting there pretty much putting all this together, he mocks Criminal Joker a little bit with first asking him if he's to be in threes like the Jokers, and Criminal Joker tells him that he was the first and that before Batman he ran Gotham. But in the case of Jason, who's not really feeling the threes thing, he reminds Criminal Joker, like, in case you haven't heard, you're a Joker short. And after that, he threatens him, telling the Joker that as soon as he gets out, he's next. But of course the Joker then BOLs, and then he lets Jason in on the secret that it hurts when he laughs. But it's here where Jason takes all of this and he asks him, like, what are you saying? Like, are you telling me that you're the real Joker? And as soon as he does and the comedian Joker puts the hood back on Jason's head, this is where it starts to come together. Because for Criminal Joker, in response to the question, is he the real Joker? He then starts to go into the speech of like, okay, like, who is the Joker really? And when he does, it sounds like he's about to get real general on the topic. But instead, what he does is he gets real detailed, talking about all the bodies that have been found, like the judge and other prospects who he's considered to be another Joker, and he's found them all underwhelming. And he really makes it sound like this long casting call call to where you just really can't find the right person for the part. But then when Criminal Joker asks Jason, why does he wear the red hood? It's right here where Jason immediately feels like, okay, like this is that conversation with Clown Joker all over again. And like that's it. Like this, it's a joke. Almost like he's bored with the repetition this second go around. And for Jason, all he really sees is the Criminal Joker as a copycat or a Joker reciting the same jokes, saying the same lines. Because Jason feels like he had this conversation before with the Clown Joker. But when Criminal Joker then tells Jason how much they have in common, with Jason being damaged and finding pleasure in hurting others, and with what Jason went through, he blames Batman, just like the Joker, and in spite of the hurt that they've caused to others, they both hate Batman the most. But Criminal Joker explains all this mainly to get the point across to Jason that this is supposed to be his third rebirth, with Jason starting from Robin and then turning to the Red Hood, and then after being the Red Hood, then he would become a Joker, or at least Criminal Joker would have hoped. And with them explaining all of this to Jason and then telling him the whole point of it is that Batman needs a better Joker, he then tells Jason like he had hoped for it to be him, but he doesn't believe that Jason is bright enough. And with that said, the comedian Joker then goes to town with the crowbar. And when this happens, like I notice it's pretty interesting the way that the eyes and we's are used between the Jokers, even with the comedian beating Jason instead of the clown. But even more so with the Criminal Joker saying that we were hoping you would be the better Joker, or more specifically, we were hoping that it might be you. And in a way, it almost feels like the Jokers, they see things in the same direction, but individually as different characters, they're strikingly different opinions. And it's like the criminal, he doesn't believe Jason's bright enough. The comedian, he enjoys beating Jason with the crowbar more than the clown did. And in the case of the clown, he more so enjoyed Jason crying for help. But then collectively, or at least with what we see with the criminal and the comedian, like the Joker wants Jason Todd to make it through that third rebirth and become the better Joker. But it's also around this time that Barbara and Bruce make their way there, because earlier when Jason had used his hood to access the Bat computer, it was then that Alfred figured out where Jason was and relayed that information to Barbara and Bruce. And when they get there, they hear this crescendo of twisted laughter, which is then followed by all the Jokerized victims who we had seen earlier skinny dipping in Joker toxin. And when one of them snatches Bruce's belt, they like inadvertently hit one of the buttons that calls in the Batmobile, and so then Bruce reaches for Barbara and he pulls her out of the way. But the other Jokerized victims, not so much. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of that Arkham game. Like in Arkham Knight, when you call for the car and it just hits everybody who's coming for you, but in a non-lethal way. But also when this happens, for a moment, Barbara believes that she sees Jason among the Jokerized victims who were hit by the Batmobile. And when she calls for Jason, one of them looks up and he's like, oh, no, I'm not Jason. And he just dies. Like, oh, I thought you said Mason. Oh, don't worry about it. Happens all the time. And then he just dies. And it's kind of messed up because like your last conversation before you go, somebody thought you was somebody else. And then it's like, oh, never mind. But then not long after this, they then find Jason. And when they find him, he's very much in that angry at Batman mode. But unlike what the Joker wanted, he's not transformed. And I really believe like the failure of this transformation, it leans into the possibility that the one person that Jason hates more than Batman is himself. And if that's the case, that's a lot of hatred because he's pissed at Bruce right now. But after this, they then take Jason back to Barbara's apartment. But when they do, Batman's gotta go because there's still two other Jokers out there. And with Bruce leaving, Barbara, she really acts like it's another sign of him not caring. But even still with him going, it makes sense because now Jason's safe, but even yet and still, like this thing isn't over. But sometime later, Barbara, she steps out for a moment and likely to check the roof or check the area. But when she gets back, she sees that Jason's taking a shower and got all hot and steamy, and one thing leads to another and they kiss. So alright, let me say something now, because I don't mind them kissing, and I wouldn't even mind them hooking up later on. But what I don't want is the two of them hooking up with Jason in a broken place. And like really, like if this were ever to be a thing, I would much rather Jason to become as recovered or as whole as he could be, or at least back to what was normal Red Hood. Because really, all in all, I'm just not a fan of people looking for love at their lowest point. And not to say that it doesn't happen, but when it does happen, that is the exception and not the rule. But that's just how I feel about it. And I think Barbara kind of feels the same way because right after they kiss, she's like, we should have did that. And right after, she's like, we should get back to work. But it's right after this where we then go back to Bruce, who is doing his research on the different Jokers and continuing his investigation looking for the next lead. And this is the part that had me thinking of those expectations which I mentioned earlier, as far as seeing things that I want to happen in Three Jokers turn towards connecting to something multiversal. And although I haven't seen any part of Three Jokers do that, neither in book 1 or 2, but with seeing Batman back in the Batcave investigating the Three Jokers, it immediately makes my mind think back to the DC Rebirth one-shot, which was heavy on Dr. Manhattan, the return of Wally West, Blue Beetle's new origin, and a number of things, all of which we've seen follow-ups to except for this. And at the time it felt like, okay, this is a thing, we're continuing from Dark Side War, but then nope, years later, we're at 3 Jokers, and 2 books in, I'm just really not sure if it's gonna happen. And I may be jumping the gun early, but we'll just have to wait and see. But with Batman continuing this investigation on the 3 Jokers, it leads them to an area either in or around Alaska, kind of teasing that that's where he's headed next. But then after this, when we jump over to what appears to be the comedian Joker, who we then find out at this point he's broken out Joe Chill from Blackgate. It's here where we see the Joker drive off what appears to be like the same van from the beginning of the issue, but fast forward to now, he has Joe Chill in the back and he's asking him on camera, why did you really kill Thomas and Martha Wayne? And it's crazy because like with the 3 Jokers and with book 2 with Joe Chill being pulled into the story, it just really feels like something crazy is about to happen. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the Patreons. Thank you guys for all your support. And for anybody who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below to where you can head to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.